Shalom Aleichem. We are continuing tonight in the life of Rabban Gamliel. I'm in the encyclopedia on page 198, in the middle of the page. So you want to click on that PDF, it says Rabban Gamliel Encyclopedia, and go to page 198. B'dorsho mishmat chamura zo. We left off where Rabban Gamliel had told Rabbi Yehoshua, come to me on your Yom HaKippurim with your money and your staff and violate Yom HaKippurim in front of me. And Rabbi Yehoshua is really worried because at the end of the day he thinks he's right in terms of the Jewish calendar. Until Rabbi Akiva and others calm him down, and he comes to visit Rabban Gamliel.
Disconnected.
Chava, can you hear me on Zoom? Can someone talk to me for a moment?
Clear.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's good mitzvot. Good. So, Rabban Gamliel, at the moment that he sees Rabbi Yehoshua appear, we have one more chair right there. Rabbi Yehoshua appear, he kisses him on his head and he tells him, you are my rabbi in wisdom and my student in the fact that you listen to me. B'dorsho mishmat chamura zo, in the middle of page 198 in the encyclopedia. When Rabban Gamliel demanded this type of discipline, obedience, me'et chaverav, from his colleagues, lo hayta lo shum pniya pratit. He didn't have any ulterior motives. As he said on that boat when he excommunicated his brother-in-law, lo lichvodo v'lo lichvod bet aviv. He didn't do it for himself. He did it for the respect of his father's home. Ela leman achadut ha'umah. He did it for the unity of the Jewish people. Inyan chashuv acher sheyatza miyavneh hu kviat hatefila hameshutefet lechol Israel. One of the first things that happened when this Bet Adin convened in Yavneh is the formal institution of a siddur, a standard siddur for the Jewish people. How did it used to work? How did Jewish people pray? By the heart. What Chachamim say, what is avodah shebalev? What is the service of the heart? So tefillah. Tefillah is the definition of service of the heart. To standardize your heart is impossible. But our rabbis at a certain point saw that Am Yisrael was having a hard time letting the words of their heart flow fluidly, appropriately. And so they gave us a guideline. Here's what we pray. Not this is all that we pray, but this is at least what we pray. And I think that's a mistake that many Jewish people make. And they think that the Siddur that we have, that is the book of Jewish prayers. No, that is the skeleton of Jewish prayers. Your job is to write your own tefillot and to say tefillot that other Chachamim wrote, and to, you know what you need to pray for. The things that you pray for, I don't pray for. The things that I pray for, you don't pray for. And you have to incorporate yourself into your tefillah.
Breslov, of course, came up with a lot of alternative prayer.
Right, correct. That was a big tenet of their Chassidut. Yes.
Is the accurate translation for tefillah prayer, or is there something more to it?
No, there is no accurate translation for anything in Hebrew. It's the word that I use because that's what people know what it means. Likely, I would say tefillah. But if I would then have to say every word in Hebrew, then all I would be speaking is Hebrew. So we'll get there one day, B'ezrat Hashem. Tefillah does not mean prayer. Prayer comes from a Latin word, which means to supplicate, to beseech, to beg. Yes, there is an element of tefillah, which is begging, but we usually call that tachanunim, which also supplications. I'm not sure that's a great word either. Tefillah, according to many chachamim, comes from the word. Where do we find the word tefillah? Is a name of a Jewish person. Yeah, that's it. Who's that? Naphtali. Naphtali is called Naphtali because here, I will read it to you from the Torah. 1 second. If I find my search bar. Yeah, once. Here. But my Bereshit now is in the Spanish translation because I was chatting with Obadiah. 1 second. How do I fix it? 1 second. Translations. I got it. Okay. Vatomer Rachel. Rachel says, Naftule Elohim niftalti achoti gam yacholti. I have wrestled great wrestlings with my sister, and I have been successful. Vatikra shemo Naftali. And she names him Naftali, meaning the one who struggles and ultimately will be successful. This word, many suggest, not everyone, but many suggest is the root of the Hebrew word tefillah. The hitpalel means to wrestle, to struggle with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a give and take. It's a give and take that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And because of that, tefillah is supposed to be this dynamic conversation between us and Borei Olam. And in a world where we spoke and HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered, we would experience that much more clearly. Rabban Gamliel is busy in Yavneh trying to standardize the tefillah for the Jewish people. That's part of what keeps people together. So you can imagine this. Standardizing tefillah means losing out on individuality, not just of individuals, but of communities. Different communities, different tribes, different people, different groups of people pray differently. They pray for different things. People like to go where they enjoy the tefillah. And that's why, very often, even though Am Yisrael can be united around schools, around yeshivot, around restaurants, around whatever Jewish organization there might be, when it comes to the Beit HaKnesset, it's very sensitive. I like to pray in a Sephardic minyan, in a Yemenite minyan, a Moroccan Sephardic minyan, a Spanish Moroccan, a French Moroccan, a Iraqi minyan, an Iranian minyan. Which Iranian minyan? I like to pray in an Ashkenazi minyan, a Hasidic minyan. Which Hasidic minyan? A Galicianer minyan, a Hungarian minyan. And as Am Yisrael has broken down into subgroups, we've added more and more denominations in which we could pray with. But it's very sensitive for people. My tefillah is very important for me. You have to imagine when you're standardizing tefillah, you're going to ruffle a lot of feathers. That's what you're going to do. You'll ruffle a lot of feathers. But on the flip side of that, you're also hoping that you may standardize and rally Am Yisrael together so that now we can pray everywhere with each other all the time, the same thing. And like with any type of standardization of anything, there are inherent risks. But this is the Sanhedrin we're talking about. So it's not a group. If any group could standardize, this would be the group that would be able to pull it off. Now there have been moments in history where people have tried to standardize Sidurim again. As recently as Chacham Ovadia Yosef, alav shalom, trying to standardize Sephardim around one Sidur. My last class I gave, I said a show about Kaddish. And in my Kaddish, I pronounced one word with a chaf, a kaf. It bothered somebody, and they went on a whole thing. No, really, it's a difference. One Sephardic Siddur says ch, one says ka. So what do you want from me? I just said whichever one was in my brain at the moment. But some people get really stuck on their details that are important, of course, but that's not what should keep you up at night. If something's bothering you about Am Yisrael, I can give you a list of things you should worry about, much more than those things. And here, Chacham Yosef tried to rally Sephardim around one Siddur. How he did it is a topic for a different class at a different time. Harav Goren, perhaps unsuccessfully, tried to rally all the soldiers of Israel around one Siddur, which he called Nosach Achid. Nosach Achid is a universal Nosach. Really, it's just Nosach Sepharad, with a little changes and switches. If you have ever read Chacham Ovadia Yosef's Teshuvah regarding Nuschaot, Ashkenazi Siddur, Sephardic Siddur, he speaks with great reverence to the Ashkenazi Siddur. It's an old Siddur. The Sephardic Siddur, he obviously has a preference for. The Nosach Sepharad, the Hasidim pray, Chacham Ovadia Yosef just refers to it simply as Nosach Ashkenaz HaMeshubash, the messed up Nosach Ashkenaz. It's the Ashkenaz Nosach that has no rhyme or reason. And
I always get mixed up with there's a Minhag Sfarad and there's a Nosach Sfarad. Like when you go to the bookstore to buy a Siddur, you find both, and one is the Hasidim use and the other
right.
is
So Sepharad should be ours, right? That should be ours. But it got culturally appropriated by the Hasidim, which ironically would never marry someone from Sepharad. But they made a Siddur, and the whole purpose of the Siddur was to make it more Kabbalistic. So they had an Ashkenazi Siddur. if you are going to look at all the Siddurim that exist, likely the Ashkenazi Siddur is not just not Kabbalistic, it's like anti-Kabbalistic. Nothing that's written in the books of Kabbalah match with the Siddur of Chachmei Ashkenaz. Because of that, when the Ashkenazim turned Kabbalists in the Hasidic era, they were having a very hard time praying with Siddurim that didn't reflect the Kabbalah that they were studying from the Sephardim. And so what they did was, they set out to change the Siddur so that it would reflect the traditions of namely the Arizal. That was who they namely were trying to get his kavanot there. So for example, in the Shema Kolenu, prayer of Namidah, Shema Kolenu, so how do we say? Say our Shema Kolenu. Shema Kolenu Adonai Adonu, Chuz V'chel. Where's my Siddur? You know, I almost never pray by heart. Here. So we say, Shema Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu Av HaRachaman Rachem Aleinu. Here, our voice, Adonai Eloheinu Av HaRachaman, the merciful Father, Rachem Aleinu, have compassion on us. In Nosach Ashkenaz, it doesn't have the words Av HaRachaman, the merciful Father. Now, the Hasidim who are reading the books of the Arizal see that there's all kinds of kavanot, things they're supposed to think about as Kabbalists when they say the words Av HaRachaman. So what do? They copied the word Av HaRachaman from the Sephardic Siddur and they stuck it in the beginning of the paragraph. So many Hasidic Siddurim say Av HaRachaman, or Av HaRachamim, Shema Kolenu, Chus V'Rachem Aleinu. Meaning they copied and pasted, but to the wrong place. You know when you do that in Word, like copy and you bend, it jumps to the wrong place? That's what happened in Nosach Sepharad. And so there are some Chazim that don't. I think your Siddur says it after Shema Kolenu. In the beginning. Chabad, for example. So what is the Chabad Siddur? Let me, before I get to Chabad Siddur. And this is all we study today. This is very important. So if we're studying today about Siddurim, it's important. Nosach Sepharad seems to have added words from the Sephardic Siddur to the Ashkenazi Siddur, but rarely did they delete phrases. So you have a lot of repetitive phrases. There's one that's in my mind right now. If you, did they say it twice? Right. So now, original Sephardim may have said De'a Bina V'Haskel or De'a Uvina V'Haskel. Depends how you read that sentence. But the Mekubalim say Chokhmah Bina V'Da'at. And so in the Hasidim they have both. Also, if you look in Shema Kolenu, all the things that should happen to our Lamanim v'Lamashinim, all the things that happen to our enemies, they have like 8 things over there instead of 4 that we know there are 4 or 5, whatever. And they have extras of many words, and sometimes they're superfluous. So there's a set I'm thinking of right now. It's been many years since I looked in a Nosach Sepharad Siddur, where it says one word and then the same word over again a second time for no good reason. This happens very often. Now, when you look at the Sepharad Siddur, you could still tell it's an Ashkenazi Siddur. It's not a Sephardic Siddur. It had all the hallmarks of Ashkenazi Siddurim are there. Now, along comes the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Alav Shalom, and he says, the Nosach Sepharad has become so chaotic, we don't know what's right, we don't know what's wrong, and he sat down, according to him, with 60 editions of the Siddur of the Arizal. Now, the Arizal seems to have not really published a Siddur. Rather, he published things you should think about while you pray, and different students have written Siddurim based on that. And he sat for a long time and sifted through and made a final edition, and that's why he called his Siddur Al Pi Nosach Arizal. Now, that's a misnomer, because the Siddur Harizal is the one the Sephardim pray with. But nonetheless, it became known as a Nosach Ari, even though the Ari never prayed that Nosach. But that's how history works, and today you have Sepharad always means not Sephardic. It always means Hasidic. And it says Sepharadi or Edot HaMizrach, that always means the Sephardic Siddur that we would prefer to buy. So many people make this mistake because they see Sepharad, it must be ours, but really Sepharad always means Ashkenazi. As complicated as that might sound, just that's what it is. Chacham Yosef was more successful than Rav Goren in establishing pretty much, I would say, that the Sephardim around the world, with the exception of ethnically motivated communities. So not in the Syrian community, not in the Moroccan community, not in the, I can't say the Iranian community, but in those communities that held strong to their original minhagim, they didn't appreciate the reworking of the Siddur that Chacham Yosef did. but pretty much everywhere you go, you will find the Sidurim of Chacham of Yosef, and he has standardized, much to the chagrin of others, the Sidur. But this is nowhere near what Rabban Gamliel was doing. Rabban Gamliel is not just standardizing a Nosach. He's standardizing the Sidur from scratch. There is no existent Sidur. He is making the Sidur. And let's look here, on page 198. Tefillah zo nikba'a al yedei Rabban Gamliel lechova kivua. Rabban Gamliel establishes tefillah as obligatory. She'en leshanot ba min hanosach. And it's forbidden to change the words of the tefillah. Neged dat Rabbi Yehoshua v'Rabbi Akiva shirshu gam liktzara. And that is in contradiction to the teachings of Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva, who said that it's permissible to abbreviate your tefillah. V'neged dato shel Rabbi Elazar omer, and it's against the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Hukanus, who said ha'oseh tefilato keva and tefilato tachanunim. If you look in our source sheet, and you don't have to because we've done this already once before, so we've looked at this Mishnah together not so many classes ago. But if you wanted to look at those sources yourself about where the Mishnah says about tefillah, you can find that in the other PDF. That's all about. It says source sheet, Rabban Gamliel source sheet, and you want to scroll down to. Are my sources numbered? No, it's just saying Mishnah Berachot 4.3, 4.4, and then from there. There is a way to number my source sheet, and I'll make sure that I do that next time when I send out the email. B'ezrat Hashem. כן רצה רבן גמליאל לקובעה חובה on page 199 שלוש פעמים ביום. Rabban Gamliel very much wanted to establish tefillah as an obligatory thing 3 times a day. Shacharit, Mincha, ve'arvit. Neged dat Rabbi Yehoshua. And that was contrary to the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. Shehora shetefilat arvit reshut. Who said in that famous story that we studied together last time. Remember the story? That the evening prayer is reshut. It's optional. Remember, he made him in front of everybody stand up, and then they got upset and they replaced him. This was part of that story. V'chan omnam hikdish Rabban Gamliel et haseah. And it seems like at that moment in time, Rabban Gamliel overstepped his boundaries, and he was too harsh on Rabbi Yehoshua. B'zeh shetil mara b'Yehoshua, and that which he scolded Rabbi Yehoshua publicly. V'amar lo, and he tells him, Yehoshua, amod al raglecha ve'idu b'cha. Stand up on your feet, and they shall testify against you. Vayoshev v'doresh v'Yehoshua amed al raglav. And that was the turning point in history, where he was speaking, and Rabbi Yehoshua was standing while he was seated, and that made the people rebel against Rabban Gamliel. As you will see in the source sheet, in all of those quotes from Masechet Berachot, which if you will agree with me, we did this already once. Let's read this story together. So you can make source sheets using Sepharya on Sepharya. And instead of me telling you, press Talmud, go to Mishnah, go to here, and then Oren tells me you forgot to say which book we're in. So instead of doing that, I just made the source sheet for you. I can't always do it, but when I have time, I was happy to do it. So, let's do this together. Let's start again. Let's do this story. It's important. So look to me, Masechet Berachot. No, it's in the same source sheet. It should say Berachot 27b 13. It depends on your screen. Hold on. Tanur Amanan, the sages taught. Maaseh b'talmid echad, there was a story about one student. Sheba lifnei Rabbi Yehoshua, who came before Rabbi Yehoshua. Amar lo, he tells him, Tefilat arvit, reshut or chova? Tefilat arvit, is it mandatory or optional? Amar le reshut. Rabbi Yehoshua says it's optional. You remember the story? So we didn't read the ending of the story, but we just read the beginning of it. I'm going to read the whole story now. Ba lifnei Rabban Gamliel, he comes before Rabban Gamliel. Amar lo, and the same student says, you notice that in the Beit Midrash, you always have a student who likes to... Now, some say this Talmid here was a very important Chacham. You can look at your own research. אמר לו, תפילת ערבית רשות החובה. It's Rabban Gamliel. ערבית, is it mandatory or optional? אמר לו, he says, והלא רבי יהושע, אמר לו חובה, he says, it's obligatory. אמר לו, he tells him, והלא רבי יהושע אמר לי רשות, but Rabbi Yeshua told me that it's optional. אמר לו, המתן עד שיכנסו בעלי תריסין לבית המדרש. Wait until the masters of the shields, wait till the Chachamim come back to the בית המדרש, and we'll talk about this then. כשנכנסו בעלי תריסין, when the Torah scholars came in, עמד השואל ושאל. The questioner stood up and asked this question. תפילת ערבית, רשות או חובה? Is the evening prayer optional or mandatory? אמר לו רבן גמליאל חובה. רבן גמליאל says obligatory. אמר להם רבן גמליאל החכמים, כלום יש אדם שחולק בדבר זה? Is there anybody here who disagrees with me? אמר לרבי יהושע, לא, רבי יהושע says no, not me. אמר לו, והלא משמך אמרו לי רשות. In your name they told me that you are telling people that ערבית is optional. אמר לה, he tells them, יהושע עמוד על רגלך ויעידו בך. Stand up on your feet and they will testify against you. עמד רבי יהושע על רגליו ואמר, רבי יהושע stood on his feet and he said, אלמלא אני חי והוא מת, יכול החי להכחיש את המת. ועכשיו שאני חי והוא חי, האח יכול החי להכחיש את החי. If I was alive and he was dead, then I could say he's lying. But being that he's alive and I'm alive, I have no choice but to admit that he's right. I did tell people that ערבית is optional. היה רבן גמליאל יושב ודורש. רבן גמליאל continued, as if nothing happened, to teach. ורבי יהושע עומד על רגליו. And Rabbi Yehoshua was standing up while Rabban Gamliel was sitting, a sign of disrespect. עד שריננו, I would think רננו, but okay. עד שריננו כל העם ואמרו לחוצפית התורגמן. They told Chutzpit, the disseminator, עמוד, stand, stop. ועמד, and he stopped translating. Amri, they said, עד כמה נצערה ונזיר? How long will he continue hurting him? בראש השנה אשתקד צערה. בבחורות במעשה רבי צדוק צערה. הכנה מצערה. טעה ונעברה. Says he is the third time now hurting, insulting Rabbi Yehoshua. We've got to remove Rabban Gamliel. He's abusing his power. It's very interesting here, you should know. Rabban Gamliel is the prince. The people are rising up against the prince and saying his disrespect to the Chacham, which is what? He's the authority. He's allowed to be authoritative. They do not appreciate the manner in which he was. Yes, he has the right. But how are you doing it? How much can you disrespect Rabbi Yehoshua in front of all of us? At the end of the day, we're his students. So they said, fine, let's remove him as the Nasi. He will no longer be the prince of Israel. But who will replace him? Now this is a hard conversation here. This is very important because when coming to decide leaders, you have to think about some of the things that are unpopular. We don't like to differentiate people. You're a good person, you're a bad person. It's not good or bad here. These are all great candidates. The problem is they're lacking certain qualities that would be needed in this generation and this time to lead the Jewish people. Maybe we'll appoint Rabbi Yehoshua. He's the Talmid Chacham. He's the one who's being picked on. It's a good job idea. Let's give him the job. Baal Maasehu. He is the opponent of Rabban Gamliel. Meaning that would be too sore of a move. It would be, you took the man that Rabban Gamliel is rebuking and you made him the leader. It doesn't look right. Nokmel Rabbi Akiva. Let's take Rabbi Akiva. He's the one who's in all these stories with us. He's the Chacham of the generation. Dilma Aneshle. Maybe, Rabban Gamliel. Let's read the Gemara this way. Okay, could be there are other ways to read it, but let's read it this way. Maybe Rabban Gamliel will pray that he should be punished for taking his job. Dilet le zechut avot, and he will die because he does not have the merit of forefathers. Why not?
He's not the prince of Israel.
Rabbi Akiva
He's a ger.
If he's not a ger, then his family are gerim. Meaning, he doesn't have these forefathers whose merits will stand up against Rabban Gamliel's prayer. Ela nokmeh Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya. Let's appoint Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya. Where do we find Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya? You mentioned him once a year. In the Haggadah of Pesach. Yeah? Am I right? Dehu Chacham. He is wise. Vehu Ashir. And he is wealthy. Who cares if he's wealthy? It's very important. Tell me why it's important. Very good. Very good. No, wealthy on its own is not only important, but it's a good value to have if possible. Vehu Asiri le'Ezra. And he is the 10th generation descendant of Ezra. You have to think about this. Ezra is a Kohen. Who does what? Remember we spoke about him? What is his role in Jewish history? He also leads a rebellion against who? Against the Kohanim. Ezra sees that the rabbinic leadership at the time, which were priests in the Beit HaMikdash, are corrupt. So he stands up and leads a rebellion. Ezra is not known as Ezra HaKohen. He's known as Ezra HaSofer. Ezra, the scribe. Meaning he becomes a Chacham. He leads this movement in which the sages of Israel replace the corrupt Kohanim who were in the temple in Jerusalem. It's very interesting that his 10th generation is the one who leads a similar rebellion against who now, I'm not saying he's corrupt, but who now is considered an incompatible leader for the Jewish people. Now here's what they're worried. Hu chacham, di makshele mefarek le. He is wise. What does that mean? What's important about that? Very good. If Rabban Gamliel challenges him, he will know the answer to this challenge. V'hu ashir. And he is wealthy. Di'it lefaloche leve kesar afu azel ufalach. That if the need arises to pay off the Caesar, the Roman occupational forces, he'll be able to do that. V'hu asiri le'ezra. And he is the 10th generation of Ezra. Di'it le'zechut havot. That he has the merit of his forefathers. V'lo matzi anesh le. And he won't be able to punish him. Ato v'amru le. They come and they tell him, Nichale lemar de leheve resh metifta. They say, Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya, are you interested in becoming the head of the yeshiva? This is a job opportunity of a lifetime. Amar lehu, he gave them the very wise answer. Ezin v'melech b'nashe beti. Let me go and ask the people of my home. Who are the people of my home?
His wife.
His wife. Azal v'imlich b'dibetu. He went and consulted with his home. With who? How do you consult with your home? Chachamim call their wives their home. She is their whole home. And so he went and consulted with his wife. Interestingly enough, when he speaks to them, so I'll consult with the people of my family. And when it comes to practically who does he ask? He asks his wife. You can already learn limudim. You can learn things from here. Before we get farther, back in the day when we were founding the Shiviti Bedin in Los Angeles, it was quite complicated for us. How are we going to find 2 other rabbis to sit on the Bedin and do what they need to do? And we went through some hard times with people going and coming, and not everyone wanted to stay on board for their own reasons. And Rav Peretz's criteria were very similar to this. Not exactly, but very similar. So it has to be a person who's chacham enough, not just a rabbi. The rabbis come a dime a dozen. Somebody who, if challenged by any other halachic authority, would be able to hold their own weight, without you, just on their own. They would be able to pen a teshuvah, write a letter, explain a halachic stance using sources in a compelling Torah manner, an authoritative way. So that was really hard to find. You're dealing with America, and you're dealing especially with California, and you're dealing especially with our neck of the woods. So that was very difficult. A person was Talmid Chacham. Rabbis, we have a lot. Talmid Chachamim, not so much. Fine, we found some Talmid Chachamim. The next thing he wanted was they should be Talmidei Chachamim in good standing. What do you mean good standing? They don't have rumors circling about them about all kinds of improper behaviors. And that's already narrowing the pond a little bit. It's complicated, that one. And then the third, and that's similar to the Yichus of Islam. The third, they needed to be wealthy. What does it mean wealthy? I don't qualify. So how do we get the bedin? The way it works is that a person, not wealthy in terms of how much money they have, but how much they don't want other people's money. That was the criteria. To find people who are not looking to make money off of other people. So we found some great candidates, by the way, people who really wanted to be involved in this project. There one rabbi saying, I'll do it, I'm more than happy to do it. I expect $150 for the final mikveh day. I'm thinking to myself, other Batei Din are charging $15,000, $13,000, $23,000. And we're not charging a penny. and all you want is $150, it comes off cheap. So you want to lose the mitzvah for $150? I know why those guys lose the mitzvah. For $23,000, you lose a lot of mitzvot. Add that up by 100 people every year, you'll lose a lot of mitzvot. But for $150, even if we convert 100 people, how much are you going to have? Is it worth losing your mitzvah for that? I couldn't understand that he was adamant. It has to be, I won't do it for less. We don't want you. Mechila, we don't want you. Baruch Hashem, we have the combination of rabbis that we have. All of us have our own Kehillat. All of us are not looking to make money off of the backs of anybody else. None of us are wealthy people. And all of us are able to work together in a way that doesn't come at the cost of the people who we're helping. And I think that's there are times where people have even challenged why do you do it this way? I cannot tell you, if I were to sit with you one day and walk you through the problems of running a bedin for Giyur, then I will explain to you how many times we have been saved by the very fact that nobody owns us and we don't owe anything to anybody. That means that a day before somebody's Giyur, I could say, goodbye, you can't pass, and I've got nothing to lose. It also means that in situations where things really need to get done, there's no motivator. There was a lawyer once, and he wanted his son to go to law school, a good law school. He got into Harvard Law. He went, he did his stint, he did his, what do they call that, internship somewhere else. He finally came back to work for his father. His father gave him, see that? Those are the cases. And he decided he wants to look through all the cases his father's ever worked on. And he comes to his dad at the 1 year review, and his dad says, no, son, what did you do? What have you accomplished? He says, Dad, you remember that case that you haven't been able to crack since 1982? He said, yeah, which one? The McNally versus Johnson? He said, yeah, that one. He said, I finally was able to close that case. He said, you idiot. That one paid for your private school. That one paid for your law school. That one paid for your wedding. That one paid. Why did you close it now? You lose it. There's an incentive to keep things open when you get paid for them. There's an incentive.
If someone doesn't get through the work and they, God forbid, sue or ask for the money back, is it like meant to be guaranteed that?
What, by us?
No, by you.
They didn't give any money to get it back. By other Bateinin? No, I don't think that's how it works. And unfortunately, we know too many people that lost all their money and didn't finish.
Right, that's all.
Yeah, no, it doesn't work like that, unfortunately.
I'm not saying that.
No, not with us. With them. Isn't it? So he goes. Rabban Gamliel goes and he consults with his wife. Amanda, she tells him the next section. So I'm Berachot 28a1. Dilma me'abrin lach. Maybe they're going to remove you from the office, just like they removed Rabban Gamliel. Meaning, this is, whenever you go to a job, they once offered me a job in Los Angeles. And aside from the fact that I wasn't looking for a job, a few times they offered me a job in Los Angeles. One of the jobs they offered me, it was like the government of a South American country. Every 2 days there was a new government. It was they tell that story. I can't speak about any politicians, but they had a whole Bet HaKnesset. They all died in a terrible plane crash. And one lady survived. And after many years, she also died. And she goes up to the Bidin Shel Mana. And she says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want to see my family, I want to see my friends. Listen, right now it's not the time yet. But there's a special room here. In this room, you could feel the spirit of your family there. Yeah, tell me. He says, come, I'll show you. You see, in this room is full of clocks. And Mechina, the story is the other way around. She's the only one who died. Everybody else survived. She said, I want to see them. I can't see them because I'm in another world. You'll see them when they die in good time. She said, I want to feel them. She said, come to my room. See all these clocks in the wall. Under every clock is a person's name. She says, what are these clocks? She says, every time somebody in the world downstairs lies, it moves one number. They lie, it moves a number. It lies, it moves a number. So she's looking at her friend Miriam's clock, and every few minutes you see it. Every time she gets a phone call, it moves. You see the rabbi of the community, it's on 11, it's moved a few times already since it. She sees her husband, and it's like the water meter outside your house, or the electric meter. And she says, tell me, but the president of the Bet HaKnesset, where's his clock? I said, no, lady, we use that for the fan. So you have a situation where they're always changing people. And what do they say? This rabbi wasn't good enough for us, that rabbi wasn't good enough for us, the next rabbi's not good enough for us. So what do you know about this community? It could be that the last 100 rabbis you had in the last 5 years, all of them were miserable people. It could be. There are enough miserable rabbis to go around. Likely, though, there's something about your community that is not able to retain rabbis. So she says, listen, it's a great job if they would have offered it to you out of the blue. But they're offering it to you after there's been a coup. There's mutiny on board. They threw him out. How do you know? Now you're going to get the job and tomorrow they'll throw you out. Wise advice. Amarla, he tells her, Lishtamash inash yom achada bechasa demokra, v'limchar nidbar. It's worth it for a person to one day be able to enjoy a very fancy glass cup. And tomorrow it breaks, so tomorrow it will break. Listen, I have a preference. I like glass cups. In my house, since I got married, I have like the skeletons of all kinds of glass sets that we once bought, and now you have one cup left here, one cup left there, one cup. So why do we keep buying glass? There are other things that don't break. Yes? Why? I enjoy drinking from this glass. So it's okay if they keep breaking, but it's better that than something else. No, that is better. Very good. That it's better to have something that you use. At least you get its use, and then it breaks. Big deal. So I'll have the office even for one day, but what I'll be able to accomplish is that great. Amale, she tells him, you always have to go to your wife for advice. She says, Let lecha chivalta. You have a problem. You have no white hair. Why is it important to have white hair? Today, everyone wants to get rid of their white hair. Why is it important to have white hair?
That's what it says in the Agadah.
The reason is that have the product, it's touch of gray. You want a little bit of white hair. You want them to know.
It's right. It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of I'm a serious person. Meaning, you're going to be so young. You're going to try to rule Am Yisrael. Like, look at this little kid. Look at this child.
Just a few days in the job, there'll be some gray hair.
So what does he do? Hahu Yoma, that day, Bar Tamne Isrei Shnei Hava. He was 18 years old. Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya was 18 years old. Itrachesh le'nisa, a miracle happened to him. Rabban Gamliel was an elder. V'hadaru le tamne sare dare chivarta. And it was tamne sare. And it was 18 rows of white hair were added to him. Rows of white hair. But if I recall, there's a right, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. He had 18 rows of white hair that grew. Now, overnight, he looked like a respectable person. So Zev said the first day on the job, he'll get white hairs? No, even before the first day on the job, he got white hairs. Hainu de Kama, Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya, and that's exactly what Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya says in the Haggadah of Pesach. Hare ani kiven 70 shana. I am as if I am kiven, as if I am 70 years old. Velo ben 70 shana. He doesn't say, I'm 70 years old and I never heard, what does it say in the Haggadah? I never heard Yitziat Mitzrayim balelot. I never heard this. He said, but now it says I'm 18. I'm 70. I'm not 70. I'm like 70. It's very interesting then. You're only 18. So why are you saying I never in my whole life merited to hear? It's very interesting language for somebody who's really only 18. I mean, if he was 70, it would make sense. So now you tell me it's like 70. I understand that part, but it makes a problem in the other part. You should know the Mekubalim here. Not in the Kubal, but the Mekubalim on the Haggadah of Pesach. I believe the Arizal says that Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya is a Gilgul of Shemuel Hanavi. Shemuel Hanavi died at 52. 52 plus 18 is 70. And there are periods, there's comparisons between the life of Shemuel Hanavi and Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya. But when I read the Gilgul of this, the spark of the soul of that, put Kabbalah aside for a moment, it's interesting that you show two people that have certain parallels with each other. Yeah, Hillel Zaken is looking out over the river, and what does he see? He sees one skull. They say it's the skull of Paro. He sees one skull floating in the river. The Arizal says that Hillel is a spark of the soul of Moshe Rabbenu. Now, what does that have to do with anything? There are certain similarities in the life of Moshe Rabbenu, the leadership qualities of Moshe Rabbenu that you also find echoes of in the life of Hillel HaZaken. And even if you put reincarnations aside, just for the factor of, wow, there could be what to learn, compare these two lives with each other, that's enough of what I can learn from there. So what happens? Tana, we was taught, Oto Hayom, that day, Silkuhu leshomer hapetach. Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya made a few changes. What are those few changes? Policies. He changed policies. Rabban Gamliel used to have a guard in the front of the Beit HaMidrash. And they gave permission for all the students to enter. Rabban Gamliel used to say, the rule was, Kol Talmid, every student, but it's a halakha. It's not an opinion of Rabban Gamliel, it's a halakha. She'en tocho kevaro, whose inside is not like their outside. Meaning, all the hypocrites, all the people who pretend to be so holy and pious, but inside they're crooked. Lo yikanes to Beit HaMidrash, is not allowed to enter the Beit HaMidrash. So Rabban Gamliel had a bouncer. If you recall the generation of Hillel and Shemaiah v'Avtalion, the guard, what was his job? Was to take money. Rabban Gamliel's guard is not there to take money. What's his job?
Was the guard's job to take money, or was that a corruption of that job?
It's a good question. I don't know. There was like a fee to enter the Beit HaMidrash. I don't know who, like that was an institution or the guard was using his power. Yeah, by Shemaiah v'Avtalion, that's why Hillel couldn't get in. I'm talking here. This guard, though, his job was, it's a qualitative job. He's checking to make sure, are you of the caliber to enter the Beit HaMidrash? And Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya, the first thing he does, he gets rid of this guard. No, I don't want only the elite to come learn here. I want everybody to come learn inside of the Beit HaMidrash. You can imagine the commotion that creates. All of a sudden, you open up the academy for free to everybody who wants. Hahu Yoma, that day, idvasfu kama safsaleh. Several benches were added to the Beit HaMidrash to accommodate the new guests. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Plige ba Abba Yosef ben Dostai v'Rabbanan. Abba Yosef, the son of Dostai, and Rabbanan argued. Chad Amar once said, it says here itosfu. I thought it says itvasfu, but I'll read it. Itvasfu arba mea safsaleh. There were 400 benches that were added to the Beit HaMidrash. V'chad Amar sheva mea safsaleh. There were 700 benches added to the Beit HaMidrash. How many people sit on a bench? Let's make a small bench. 6, 4, times 400, times 700. That's how many people who always wanted to learn in the Beit HaMidrash but were not allowed inside. That's how many people came to learn Torah. Havekach chadshad da'ateh Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel became very sad. Amar, he said, Dilma, maybe chas v'shalom manati Torah Yisrael. Maybe I'm guilty. See, that's the amazing thing. Here's a leader who's been dethroned. And he is not mad. He's doing a cheshbon nefesh. He's thinking about, what did I do wrong? He says, did I possibly stop so many Jews from learning Torah? Is that on my back? They showed him in his dream white jugs that were full of ashes. What are ashes? What can you do with ashes? Nothing. Nothing. Meaning these are fancy jugs, but they're empty inside. I mean, you were always careful that your jugs should hold oil, wine, silver. I don't know. But these jugs are full of ashes. Meaning, don't feel so bad. The people that Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya let in are not so special. The Gemara says, "Velohi, hahi liyatov da'atehu da'achzone." He said, don't think for a moment that Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya was wrong for letting them in. Rather, this was a dream that was given to Rabban Gamliel to make him feel good about himself. But really, in Shamayim, they were very grateful for what Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya did for Am Yisrael. And the Gemara continues. Tana, our rabbis taught us, Eduyot, the tractate of Eduyot. Have you heard of Eduyot? It's in the Talmud. Eduyot, bo bayom nishnet. The whole Masechet was taught on that day. V'chol hecha da'amrinan. And everywhere in the Mishnah, where it says, bo bayom, that day, and there are many things throughout the Mishnah. It says, bo bayom, bo bayom, bo bayom, bo bayom. Whenever you see the words on that day in the Mishnah, so you have a whole Masechet Eduyot. That's all, that Mishnah happens all in one day. Yeah? But bo bayom is scattered throughout the rest of the Mishnah. Whenever you see bo bayom, hahu yom ahava, was that one day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya was the leader, that's when they learned that Torah. There was no law in the court that they were deliberating about in the Beit HaMidrash that they didn't answer that day. They got the answers. Va'af Rabban Gamliel. Where was Rabban Gamliel when all this Torah study was going on? Lo mana atzmo mi bet midrash afilu shah echad. He didn't leave the bet midrash even for 1 minute. So he accepted that he was thrown out. He stepped down from his chair. He gave it to Rabbi Elazar ben Azarya, and he spent the whole entire day studying Torah with them as a student. You need to understand the greatness of Rabban Gamliel. I think that we look at him earlier in this position of authority, embarrassing Rabbi Yehoshua. Who did he think? We said, of course he said he didn't do it for himself. He didn't do it for his father's honor. Of course he said that. But here is he being put to the test. What do you do when they throw you out? Where do you go? He goes nowhere. He's still a Chacham. I still need to learn Torah. And if I'm not fitting to lead and there's someone else that needs to lead, I'm going to come and learn Torah from them like any other student in the Beit HaMikdash. He just takes a chair in the back. If you don't recognize the greatness of Rabban Gamliel from this, there's nowhere else you can see greatness like that. But the story doesn't end. Ditnan, our rabbis taught us, Bo bayom, on that day, Ba Yehuda, let's do this. I would like to read the rest of the story tomorrow, next week. I want to do some Shulchan Aruch tonight. So if you'll let me, we're going to continue this story from the middle next week.